Hello friends, welcome to the Eastern Front channel. Today we will talk about the memoirs of Friedrich Paulus adjutant Wilhelm Adam. He fought with Paulus until he was captured in 1943 in Stalingrad. In his memoirs, he tells in detail the story of the Wehrmacht disaster near the city on the Volga River. Links to other parts of his memories can be found in the description below the video. 1st January 1943. The first morning of the new year, when I awoke, the fire was already flickering in the stove. I thrust my legs into my boots, slipped on my uniform jacket, and went into the office. In contrast to the year before in Poltava, my colleagues sat there, downcast, indifferent, dulled. They shook hands silently. I too did not try to liven them up, being myself inwardly torn. The section leaders subsequently met together in Schmidt's office to wish Paulus a happy new year and to congratulate him on his promotion to Colonel General. I knew that he had been expecting this promotion. Now that it had arrived, he only gave a slight smile. We had already left the dugout when I realized that I had forgotten to add the third star to his epaulets. I went back to see to this. To my apology, he said, "Leave it, Adam. Hitler only wants to relieve my end with this promotion." The normally withdrawn general started to recount his visits to the divisions. "You can be pleased that you don't have to drive over the battlefield every day. When you returned from a visit to the 76th Infantry Division one day, I clearly noticed how you had been struck by the experience. Meanwhile, everything has become much worse. Hunger is leaving ever crueler traces. At various dressing stations, the doctors assure me that the hunger and cold are causing many more deaths than enemy action. Hospitals and main dressing stations are completely full of thousands of wounded for whose attention the necessary things are lacking. In many, the will to live has gone. Hopelessness continues to spread. For all of this, one only has fine words left. I thought, General, that following Hude's talk with Hitler, much would have changed. As far as I know Hude, he would not have held anything back. Let us hope that he behaved that way. I only fear that it is now too late. I am bound in any case as before by Hitler's order to hold on here. Have you already heard, Colonel General, of the crazy rumors going all around the cauldron? On our Western Front, the soldiers of an SS division are rumored to have reached Kalach. Even the thunder of the guns has been heard. Others are already talking again of a parachute division having landed between Kalach and Karpova. I know about these rumors, and I only want to know who is spreading such nonsense. One regimental commander said Patonic Airfield is the source of this nonsense. Perhaps he is right. I think it possible that the pilots of the transport aircraft, either unknowingly or perhaps directed from outside, are being set to conceal the fight to the death. Are you thinking of doing something against such rumor-mongering, General? Should we not finally tell our soldiers the truth? Of course we have to. I am awaiting the return of Hude to do so. In the first days of January, I received a call from the airfield commander. 2 large transport aircraft have arrived with soldiers. Where shall we send them to? I was baffled. What use was a handful of soldiers to us against this deadly threat? Was this the reaction of Army Group Dawn to the Army Commander-in-Chief's message of the 26th December? We didn't need 40 or 100 soldiers, but fully established divisions. Above all, we needed food, ammunition, tanks, and fuel. Please wait 15 or 20 minutes. We will check which divisions need reinforcement most. I thought it over. The disbandment of the 79th Infantry Division had been ordered the previous day. The still available soldiers and officers had been divided up almost exclusively among the divisions fighting in the city, and the divisional staff had been flown out. The 44th Infantry Division had suffered the most casualties in the last few days. Once Major General Schmidt had agreed, I told the divisional adjutant and told him to collect the newcomers. Paulus took this action by the Army Group as a hollow gesture. He told Army Group Dawn not to fly in any more soldiers and officers, just more supplies. Finally, he had made the bread ration for everyone even smaller. Manstein then forbade the further flying in of troops. As he was about to dismiss me, the Colonel General handed me a letter that he had received from Manstein. The Army Group Commander had expressed his sympathy and understanding in relation to the repeated requests from Paulus to permit the breakout of the Styx army. However, the superior knew better how to judge the situation Therefore, Paulus had to bear the consequences of the orders given. With this, the responsibility for whatever was to happen was lifted from him. That was interesting. Are you not aware, General, that Manstein, from whom we expected so much, is completely bound by Hitler's dictatorship? I have that impression too, Adam. Actually, this recognition must have arisen earlier. Manstein, outside of the cauldron occupied by the Sixth Army, must have known much sooner the enormous danger that threatened, and yet in recognizing it much more clearly nevertheless adhered to the lack of responsibility that went with Hitler's increasingly betrayed principle of order, obedience. His military, moral, and historical guilt for the shocking downfall of the Sixth Army would clearly be greater than that of Paulus and several other high-ranking officers of this army. But they too were led by the same soulless cliches and contributed to the Sixth Army's death sentence. Again and again we took refuge in the hope that those whom we ourselves had already often had to convince would recognize that they were being unrealistic. So we kept asking ourselves, where is who? We still did not know when something else would disturb the punishing waiting. On the 7th January 1943, the Red Army High Command informed the Commander-in-Chief of the Sixth Army by radio of the appearance of 3 envoys. The Army declared itself ready to receive them. The next day, the Northern Front reported that envoys approached the fighting line. At the same time, Soviet loudspeakers announced the contents of the capitulation text. Pamphlets fell from red-starred aircraft and fluttered from the sky. At about the same time, it was announced that General Hu had landed at Potomac. Tensely, we awaited his arrival at Army headquarters. Decorated with the oak leaves and swords to the Knight's Cross, Hu drove directly to Paulus. In the presence of Schmidt, he reported on his meeting with Hitler. When I was shortly afterwards summoned to the Commander-in-Chief, Hu was already on his way to his command post. I will tell you the news that General Hu brought, so that you have an idea of the Army High Command's intentions. The Führer is planning a new relief attack with much stronger forces than were available to Hoth. For this, tanks are to be concentrated behind a new southern front. Some of them will roll up next, and naturally the assembling of these forces will take some time. The beginning of the attack can be reckoned as the middle of February. Hitler has agreed to renew the organization of air supply and to improve it considerably. So far one can welcome the High Command's plan. Now comes the great but. These measures can only be realized when it is possible to form a new southern front and to bring back Army Group A from the Caucasus without severe losses. Therefore, the Sixth Army must continue to tie down as many of the enemy's forces as possible. For us, this means holding on. Hitler is merely agreeing to a reduction of the cauldron if it is absolutely necessary. May I now ask a question, General? How do these widespread breaches look from the outside? Where does the fighting front run in the southern sector? What forces will close the outstanding gaps resulting from the defeat of the Allied armies? I asked Hu the same question. However, he was unable to give any satisfactory reply. At Führer headquarters, as at Army Group Dawn, one is limited to some general hints. For certain, we only know that Army Group A is moving towards Rostov. At last, one must say. For me, this is the bitterest thing that we have to suffer all these agonies any longer. The promise of improved supplies is more than vague. But as you say yourself, Adam, what can I do other than accept the order to fight on? Fighting on requires first of all that the army is saved from starvation, in addition to sufficient ammunition, fuel, and medical requirements being flown in. Captain Toke flew off already 8 days ago. I am convinced that he has tried everything to improve our supplies, but hardly anything seems to have changed. We simply lack the basics. Finally, the enemy is also on hand. The pilots report that the anti-aircraft defenses of the enemy have increased considerably within the last weeks. The shot-down figures increase and the flying distances are longer. Many aircraft have to be repaired after being hit. Excuse me, General, if I say Hitler's renewed promises about the improvement of air supplies can be described not only as vague, but rather more as thoughtless. For me, the trust fades away with this eternal putting off. Paulus looked at me with astonishment. But you have gone along with it strongly in the last few days, Adam. Where is your usual optimism? Obviously, the army can only hold on until Hood's relief date in the middle of February, providing the men are sufficiently and continuously supplied with all the necessary items. I do not conceal that I am skeptical in other respects. But firstly, I do not know all the Army High Command's air transport reserves. Secondly, I am not responsible for the fulfillment of the promises. And thirdly, my freedom to handle things was taken from me on the orders of the superior headquarters. On these grounds, I have also requested the decision of the Army High Command on the Red Army's offer of surrender. I presume that the answer will soon arrive. Lieutenant Colonel Zimmerman reported that the commanding generals were assembling in a room nearby. I went to my dugout. Later, the Army's chief engineer, Colonel Sell, told me that he had taken part in the conference that followed. All the commanding generals already knew the text of the offer of surrender. Paulus told them of Hood's report and asked them to state their positions. They all spoke against surrender. They assured him this was also the opinion of the divisional commanders. Meanwhile, the reply arrived from the Army High Command. It read, "Capitulation out of the question. Every day that the army holds out longer helps the whole front and draws away the Russian divisions from it." Paulus' request for freedom of action was again denied. Army Group Dawn shared the Army High Command's position. Major General Schmidt drew up the consequences from Hood's report and the surrender offer to the army, which entailed a further calming of the staff, rear services, and hospitals with the aim of establishing more emergency units to strengthen the front line, and the further construction of positions for the West Front as already marked out by Sell, the Army's chief engineer. He went on to say, "In future, enemy envoys are to be driven back by fire." "The Chief of Staff is back on top," said Sell. "He has made me responsible for setting out the new line of defense. Where I will get the manpower I have not been told, of course. Have you actually read the offer of surrender?" "No, I have not received a copy, only heard something about the content." "Just concern yourself with it and read it through. There is much in it for you." The colonel had hardly gone when Cupper appeared with a leaflet in his hand. There I had the text of the Soviet ultimatum. It began with a detailed analysis of the Sixth Army's situation. This fully coincided with my own assessment. It warned of the worst frosts, the icy steppe winds, and snowstorms to come. Apart from our hopeless situation and the futility of further resistance, the Red Army High Command suggested that, in order to avoid useless loss of blood, resistance by all the surrounded German troops should cease, and that they should organize themselves for surrender. It went on, "All members of the Wehrmacht of these surrendering units will keep their uniforms, badges of rank and decorations, their personal necessities and valuables. The senior officers will retain their daggers and sidearms. The officers, non-commissioned officers, and men who surrender will immediately receive normal rations. All wounded, sick, and frostbite cases will be given medical attention. We expect your reply in writing on the 9th January 1943 at 3 p.m. Moscow time through your personally appointed representative, who, in a recognizable car with a white flag, must drive along the road from the Kani bypass to Kotlubin station. Your representative will be awaited on the 9th January at 3 p.m. by authorized Russian officers in Department B, half kilometer southeast of the bypass. Should our request to surrender be rejected, we inform you that the troops of the Red Army and the Red Air Force will be forced to destroy the encircled German troops. The responsibility for their destruction will be borne by you." The letter was signed by representatives of the headquarters of the Red Army, Colonel General Artillery Voronov, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Don Front, Lieutenant General Rokossovsky. I was of the opinion that, with the offer of capitulation, the survivors of the surrender need not fear a bullet in the back of the neck. On the other hand, I was unable to get away from Paulus' arguments. Looking back at this time, I must say today that the rejection of the offer to surrender was correct at the time, as the Commander-in-Chief of the Sixth Army contested the decision of the Army High Command. On the other hand, it was pointless in light of the miserably dying divisions and the unscrupulous breach of faith by Hitler regarding the Sixth Army that Paulus was denied the ability to exercise freedom of action in full agreement with the conventional military concept of loyalty to the loyal. I estimate that far more than 100,000 soldiers and officers would have been saved and able to return to their families at the end of the war. The argument that the blooded and hungry Sixth Army would draw strong enemy forces away from the German southern front was based on scant evidence. The Soviet Supreme Command doubtless also knew that the Sixth Army had been forbidden to break out by the High Command, and that its fighting strength was greatly reduced. This knowledge enabled the Russians to seek an end to the Soviet troop concentration on the Volga. The rejection of the Soviet capitulation offer of the 8th January 1943 is historically, militarily, and humanely seen as the greatest cause of blame, not only on the part of the German High Command and the headquarters of Army Group Don, but also of the Commander-in-Chief of the Sixth Army, its corps, and its divisions. Dear friends, that's all for today. Please support this video with any comment and don't forget to press like. It was Tin, and see you.